Welcome to the Homegrown podcast. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey. And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's guests are Jenny and Carrie, two pediatric OT sisters who founded On Track Baby to help new moms and dads navigate the uncertainty of caring for a newborn. After both sisters experienced developmental delays with their first babies, they dove deep into biology, neuroplasticity, epigenetics, and anthropology to create the now viral Noel method that has helped thousands of new moms help their babies grow strong and happy, including my own. I can't wait to share this episode with you guys. We talk about so many important but misunderstood concepts when considering newborn care, developmental delays, baby containers. Y'all, we go deep, and this episode is so rich. If you are expecting or plan to have babies one day or have new grandbabies, whatever stage of life you're in, I promise this episode will be applicable to you. Before we get there, though, I want to share a podcast listener only special for the first time. We're trying this out. And we just want to say thank you for being here. This podcast means a lot to us. We love doing it. And as a way to help support the show and also help support you and your family growing healthy and strong, we want to offer you a discount code. You are going to use the code podcast10, and that's going to get you 10% off of both of our shops. If you guys have been around a while, you know we have a home goods store called Hazelmeyer Goods. There we have things like organic tea, incredible specialty coffee, large dish soap. We've got sourdough tools. We've got custom-made bread boxes, handmade ceramic mugs, all kinds of amazing things, basically stuff that we looked around our house and we thought, we need a really good source for this. Let's go find an artisan to make it for us, and then let's bring it to the masses. So you can use the code podcast10 if you want to get any of those items I just mentioned over at Hazelmeyer Goods. The URL for that is shoptheh.com. You can also use podcast 10 to get 10% off of any of our educational resources over at homegrowneducation.org. Here we have both digital and PDF versions of meal plans, meaning what's for breakfast, what's for dinner. We have nutrition curriculum for your kiddos, both for pre-K through second grade and those third through sixth graders that we love so dearly. You also can get access to our real food framework, either digital or print, and again, 10% off, which for most orders is going to cover your shipping completely, or if you want to stock up, you'll save even more. So go use the code podcast10 on either of our shops. Thank you so much for being here. And as we dive into today's show, we're going to start by hearing how Jenny and Carrie got into this line of work.
Okay, I'm Carrie, and I'm the older sister. Jenny likes me to clarify that, even though many people think we're twins. But we're sisters and we're pediatric OTs. We actually went to school together, and our dad was a professor. He taught us in our class, and we were happily going down our therapy journey of being clinical therapists for 10 plus years. And right after we opened our own private practice, we became moms. And that was just, as I don't know, whenever I relive my first time mom experience, I still say I was like sucker punched basically, because it was just nothing like I had expected. It was so hard. And then we were trying to work at the same time. And I was just like, didn't really understand much about, even though we had been in pediatrics, we actually don't learn in OT school about natural development, which is crazy. We learn what to do when babies go off track or when kids go off track down the road. But once we became moms, we started kind of noticing things that were happening with our first, and we can dive into that in a second. But it begins really with birth. And so we went back. I had a breech C-section as my first, and that was just really hard to recover from. And so we kind of dove in between our first and second babies, we wrote the method, which we now talk about on Track Baby, to help new moms navigate this newborn time period, which is where most of everything gets set up for Milestones. And
I'd say often goes off track if you don't feel informed and confident with what to do with your little tiny baby. And that was me. And like, Carrie and I love to tell on ourselves because, the more you live, I guess we can say, the more you learn and the better you do. But being a new parent, it's kind of crazy how poorly prepared we really are. It's always about the nursery and the baby registry and like how
all the things.
And instead you're like about to enter this transformative thing like the birth of your baby. And so often we're outsourcing that information to people that we think know better than us. And, you know, it's just like, you're not really preparing yourself to be a parent that feels informed or feels like they know what to do. You know, you end up doing what we call winging it style parenting, where you're just kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing if it works. And I watched her become a mom because I am the younger sister for 9 months. And she was just, you know, it's a sad tale, but it has a happy ending. Right. It's just, she was so miserable. Like it was the sleep thing, the swaddle thing. Breastfeeding was extremely hard. She was screaming at her husband. Joe might or might not relate during some of that. You know, there's just like all these new partner roles and you're just like, you can't get your teeth brushed. And it's just like, it shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. You know, it's just that we live in a very consumeristic and product-based society that has all these conveniences designed to supposedly make it easier, but like in the strange reality that we live in, it actually makes it harder, because if the product doesn't work, then suddenly there's a problem with your baby. And not just like your baby being a baby and you not having all the information. And it's like, I need to buy another pacifier. I need to get a different swaddle. I need a more expensive crib, you know, those things. So for me as a first-time mom, I loved being a mom. I think most women can relate to that. But because I had, you know, just like what I thought was standard hospital birth, you know, you have the epidural because you can't handle the contractions, and you know, you go through all the cascade of what happens, whether or not it ends up in an emergency, you're still at the mercy of, you know, the hospital that you're at and the staff and, you know, just the whole dynamics of it. And not realizing, like, I'm sure your choices along the way have brought you to that, you know, when you're interfering with a normal process, very oftentimes it doesn't work out the way, you know, nature intended it to. So for me, I didn't feel bonded at all with my baby, which is kind of sad, you know, looking back, my first baby. And I am pregnant too with my fourth. And I have to say that so that when I sound out of breath, you know, anybody out there can relate who's having a baby, because it's like minimal error at this point. But my first baby, I was kind of bored at home. I was like twiddling my thumbs, like, you know, what do I do with him? I wanted all the latest gadgetry, and I had it. I was spending thousands of dollars on electronic rides for my, you know, 1 month old. And like, he was out of them within like 2 months, like overweight. And like, this is a crucial thing. I know y'all talk about how food nourishes us, and movement nourishes a baby. And if they're just sitting on their backs, like literally all the time, they grow overweight very quickly, which can be kind of a sensitive topic, because people are like, well, no, those, you know, those rubber band rings are cute on my baby. And they are, except you don't, as a parent, want to set your baby up to have a harder road. I mean, we're all like aiming to give our babies the best start, except we don't really know how to do that. And then our babies are put in these gadgets and, you know, they gain weight quickly. And then they're having a hard time moving too, which is what happened with my first baby. He was very adorably fluffy, and just, he actually didn't even crawl until 1 year old. And as a therapist, I didn't even really pick up on this idea that he wasn't really meeting milestones until around month 8 and 9th. You know, it's like you get blown off by people, like, you know, everybody's on their own timeline, and there is some nuance to it, but really it all came down to what we discovered later on, which is the brain development. And I'd love to hear y'all's observations of what looked different for you with your third baby, now that you've seen this different way of handling her. But to wrap up, what ended up happening with me is that he became a one-year-old, not able to even stand up. Then he was 16 months old and still not walking. And so he ended up in therapy. It's like the ultimate, I don't know, I don't want to say shame for a therapist, but you know,
surprising.
We thought we knew what to do with these kids. And so it really just sent us on a totally different trajectory of like, what are the missing pieces of this early infant time period? And how actually does it affect really your whole life? Like, that's the craziest thing that we've really been interested in as we have delved deeper into these topics of like early childhood. It's like our emotional reactions as adults, how we respond to our parents, how we parent our children goes back to how we were treated as a baby, and like how coordinated we are, how sensitive you are to your environment. Like, are you okay in crowded rooms, or do you kind of resist that? All of that is forming during these early months and that first year. And so for me, that was mind blowing to discover, and then move into how much simpler it is to just set your kid up from the beginning to fly through physical and, obviously emotional development at the same time without having to go back and remedy it, because it's so much harder to fix after the gap gets wide.
So much harder.
Okay, so what you just shared is so relatable. And like I said, all the moms are just like shaking their heads like, I've been there. I feel that. So I'll give you the shortest synopsis of what happened with our third, because she's such the perfect example, right? I went from, 2 hospital births, one being a breech C-section, so I can relate, to my third being a home birth, completely unmedicated, physiological water birth, peaceful. And I'm telling you, this baby was a gangster. Like, she's just an absolute rock star.
Hilarious.
I didn't do the containers, and we'll get into that. I didn't do the swings and that sort of a thing. I remember I have video of her kind of like planking.
Yeah.
And almost getting on hands and knees, rocking at 4 months old.
Yes.
And I was like, girl, why are you, she never hit this really chunky baby stage. She was always kind of like fit and trim, but not like underweight.
Yeah. Right.
And her mobility, she started crawling like right at 5.5 months, maybe 6 months. She started being interested in food and eating really well. Now, we did a couple things for her that kind of helped progress. We did chiropractic care. We looked into lip and tongue tie revision. So we were helping her in that journey. But since then, she has hit milestones far and above. Now she's a 4-year-old who is just unreal. Like, she zips around on a 2-wheeler bike. She's doing she's just insane.
We've always referred to her, and I'm trying to be careful not to use terms that make her uncomfortable, but she's very sturdy.
She's very sturdy.
Yes.
And it's the progression.
Even emotionally, you guys, and I want to talk about this. Her emotional resilience is unlike that of our other children, and 2, that of like other kids that I've seen. And I will tell you, there's a difference between the emotional resilience of my beautiful C-section born baby,
right,
and my at-home baby. And I want to talk about what that looks like, because my middle that was born via C-section didn't walk till 18 months, didn't hit some of her milestones. Like, there were things that were just different in her experience. And so this is such a sensitive topic, because moms are already on guard of like, I don't know what I'm doing. But I want to give them the information of like, no, you have the education to empower yourself to know when your baby's off track.
Yes.
And I think that's the confusing part, is lots of people want to validate. Oh, it's fine. My kid didn't walk till this, or my kid never crawled. It's fine. So can we go through some of that natural development and just paint a picture of what like ideal outcomes look like for parents, so that they kind of have an idea of, okay, how am I falling, or how should I be thinking about this?
Yeah. You go ahead.
No, well, I don't know. I'm like, where should I start?
Why don't you start with birth, and we'll move through
I think it's great. And I do think it's so relatable, since we've both had C-sections. It's easier for us to just speak from this voice as well, because I do think a lot of C-section moms get on guard very quickly, without it having to be that way. Honestly, I think, like you said, and this, I don't know what your experience is with going for the C-section with breech, is that I had a provider at the time that was not willing to do anything else. And because I wasn't, truly understanding what I was kind of getting myself into, I just kind of agreed. I just outsourced the whole thing. I was like, you know what? It's probably going to be way less painful. I had all these ideas in my mind. And looking back, and just like in our private practice, what we've observed, for years, is that most of our clients that came in, like babies and young children within the first year, were C-section. And that was probably at a 90%. When we take birth history, probably almost all, if not a few outliers.
I don't speak in absolute.
Not outliers. Yeah, but what we realized,
there was a significant trend showing up in our patient files that started really sending alarm bells off, going, what's happening here that would be such a common denominator?
Yeah. And so when we were looking back and then just going through how birth actually affects the milestones, from the very beginning, so much of what you want in birth too is to prepare your baby to come to the outside world and have their body be ready to move against gravity. And so just really quickly in a nutshell, for like a breech C-section like us, you don't really get any time for the baby to prepare themselves at all. It's like slice open and here you are, world. And instead of getting to move down the canal, getting to feel contractions, which all influence the muscle tone and the reflexes for a baby and sets them up to begin to, move around on the outside. And so when we begin to just even look at birth in that way, we always go back and look at what type of birth are we doing and what is interfering with that natural sequence that we now know sets a baby up to move more easily on the outside.
Yeah. And I would go to say that by design, this is just something that people just don't understand actually makes a difference.
Right.
It's actually the squeeze the baby receives, and it's even affectionately called the squeeze. It pushes the fluid out of the lungs. Like Carrie said, the pressure on different body points of the baby turn on
head to toe.
These reflexes like that startle that people are always trying to swaddle away. And so those reflexes, because a baby can't move on their own, need to be turned on so that they survive on the outside. So what the C-section does is essentially skips it, and your baby is set up without all its default buttons turned on. And so they can become very easily hypersensitive to the environment. So when you are first born, your brain just takes everything in all at once. That's why you're only awake for a few 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and that newborn is passing out because they're hearing things, seeing things, feeling things. It's just like onslaught of information to the brain. The brain handles only so much, then it shuts down. So as you age, if your brain doesn't begin to filter information out, that makes you, not pay attention to like the fluorescent light above you buzzing or like the dog barking while you're trying to do something. Like if that becomes like your brain doesn't know how to shut that off, then you're like irritable, or you have a really low threshold for like handling things. So transitions for these kids down the road can be very difficult. Like they're playing, they don't want to get in the car, or now suddenly they don't want to get out of the car. Now they don't want to go to the store. Now they don't want to leave the store. I mean, I don't want to say we dealt with this, but Carrie's first is what we call the classic C-section baby. She turned into a very sensitive kid, very tearful, very moody, very just hyper aware of everything, and her brain isn't able to calm itself well. And so that is part of what we discovered in that birth process, and you're seeing in your own children there. The emotional resiliency comes from how well and how safe I feel. I don't mean to say how well I feel in my body. How safe does my body feel? So when you bear hug, or when you're greeting somebody, the hug itself is a replication of the birth canal squeeze. It's like the first feeling of safety that the baby gets after this transformation. The contractions start, you're getting the squeeze, you come out on the other side. And so throughout our entire adult life, we relate to how compression helps our body feel safe. And the other thing about C-sections that we now know is that because the baby doesn't get a warning before the birth process occurs, they go from being in water, which is like, we've all been underwater in a pool, to in that water to immediate sensory information flood. And depending on the following up of care after the birth, like are they going skin to skin? Are they getting to be immediately with the mother for reassurance? The stress of it gets actually transferred over to the baby because the mother generally is more stressed. It's cold in the operating room. You're strapped down. You might feel some of it. You might feel none of it. There's just a lot going on. And that stress, that cortisol hormone leaks to the baby and tells the baby, you're coming into a world that's unsafe. And so they stay in high stress, and they can end up being a colicky, cry baby. And it's just like a hard start to motherhood. And that's what's happening for so many new moms, first time moms, even, repeat moms who end up having these situations come up with C-sections, not being aware. that there are some things that you can do differently after your baby comes that to help counteract that, immediate flood of sensory information. But again, because there's so many things to buy and so many fun baby things to use, or your best friend tried this and it worked, we end up missing this part a lot of times. And it affects like how you bond. It affects how your own hormones respond, breastfeeding. And so much of that plays into how the brain feels safe and secure in its most vulnerable time period. That kind of, that's kind of the beginning, but we
kind of the beginning.
Just started at the tip of the iceberg with it all. What are your thoughts as you hear that from your like C-section to, water birth perspective?
Yeah, I'm realizing now how impactful birth experience is for the rest of that child's life. And I don't want to say that and freak people out, but I think it's an opportunity to learn what we can do to counteract that. So even now I'm ready to like jump into solution mode, and I would love to hear from you guys how we can bridge some of those gaps that started at birth, because unfortunately so many birth plans aren't going as planned, right? And so I'd love to hear just from what you saw in your own case studies. How can we help remedy some of these issues that are starting at birth?
You go ahead.
Well, and I do want to know, a lot of moms will write into and be like, well, oh my goodness, I had an emergency C-section and I couldn't help, all these things, which we totally get. And we do say like sometimes emergency C-sections, the baby has actually gotten a lot of influence to just contractions and a little bit more of the time that something's about to happen that's pretty big. Like the baby is getting a little bit of the journey, and then for whatever happened, it doesn't end the way you would want it to, but it's not all a loss, like just it's not a loss at all. And so, there's a huge difference between like if you had an emergency right away, why you had the emergency versus like a breech, versus just like what if you had a really stressful, vaginal birth. There's the level of stress is really what plays the biggest role. Is what we found now is like our mothers actually thinking about where they're giving birth and how stressed they are thinking about giving birth. Like the environment of it is so crucial, because I think so many of us, we're just raised to think like default mode, like go to the hospital, have your baby, like who cares, get all the pain meds. And then, you do it, and then maybe postpartum is just like horrific, like basically what happened to us. And so some of the, solutions, just like, even if you're pregnant for the first time or even your, second, third time, is to just really think about where am I going to be the least amount of stress, when I have my baby. And can I lean into that? And then after you have your baby, like Jenny was saying, immediately doing skin to skin, immediately keeping your baby very close to you, and kind of like delaying any poking and prodding, like just immediately if you can spend, and I mean, it is actually recommended up to 3 hours uninterrupted. And if you think about that in terms, I don't know how y'all's skin to skin right after birth was, or if you got that. I mean, I think I held my first for like maybe 30 minutes, but I was so drugged up, I couldn't really even, think. But afterwards, we always say in the newborn time period, constantly be holding your baby skin to skin, like shirt off, like bra off, basically, like skin to skin for the dopamine release and the oxytocin release, which will help just heal and then rebond if you had a very stressful
right away.
Yeah.
And during that time period, it's actually the most beautiful thing is it's just responsive parenting. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the mixed messaging during that time, and I'm sure you heard these too, is like after your baby gets a couple weeks old, you need to start like timing your responses. Like let them cry for 5 minutes and then go in, or cry, go out, come back. There's just so much strange advice out there for moms, and that's unresponsive parenting. Like if you're allowing your baby to cry just for the sake of thinking that it's training them to need you less, people need to understand, and this is the emotional part of infancy that directly impacts us as adults, is that crying is only ever communication. It's a communication as an adult, it's communication as a toddler, it's communication as a baby, and they have 0 other forms yet. So what they're discovering in their brain is that I'm alerting my mother or my caregivers that I need something, and either the environment is going to respond and tell me that the world is safe, or they're not, or it's going to take a long time, or like I'll have to cry for a very long time period to get the response that I'm looking for. And either that either they do, hopefully that's the solution, is that if you can just respond to your baby and not freak out, like run across the room. I definitely felt like there are times, you feel it instinctually. It is your hormones all playing out perfectly. Like when your baby starts crying, it's like, you got to get to that. Or if your partner tries to pick the baby up or some like granny walks in and let me have that crying baby. It's like the reason it feels so uncomfortable to mothers is that this is all neurological. It's all hormone based. It's not just in your head. And when you just go back and respond to your baby, you feel better, the baby feels better. And like then another neuron is connected and the baby feels safe and it moves on from there. And the solution is responsive parenting and closeness. And it goes so fast. We know being about mothers times 4, those babies do not last that long. And it's just that I think the more babies I have, the more responsive I've gotten. I mean, obviously over the years, because it's not like I feel the need to train them to be like, okay in that chair or like, okay and not with their dad, which, Joe, I'm sure you're a great dad. But there's just roles, and Carrie always says this to me. It's like there's a fork and a spoon. We both have roles and we have things that we do.
Both help you eat.
But, they have different purposes. And sometimes this modern version of parenthood is like, we both do the same thing. We both split these duties 50-50. I feed, you feed. It's just like that just doesn't always work, because then we're mixing these signals to, ourselves and our baby. It's like, and mom just wants the dad to read their mind. And it's just not possible.
Wow. I love that you guys are hitting on this point right now, because this is something Joey and I have talked about. We tend to we get a lot of scoffs that Joey doesn't get up in the night with me. Like I'm totally fine to get up and feed the baby. Like I want to hold the baby. He's not so much of a snuggler, although he will. It's not like he rejects if I pass the babe. But there are just certain things that I just feel comfortable doing. I don't feel this need to share the burden with him in the same way. We don't have to be carbon copies of each other. Instead, we say like we would never have 2 quarterbacks on the same team, right? So one of us in a season is going to be the quarterback and the other one needs to be on the sidelines freaking gearing up, training, so that when they have to enter the field, they're sharp and ready to go.
Yes.
I don't follow sports, so I probably botched all those analogies.
We got it. We got you.
Joey's like, what?
Joey's a cheerleader.
Hey. All day.
He's my biggest cheerleader.
Bombs, everything I need.
But I just want to reiterate this point that you guys said, because I want people to hear this. You're saying that there's a biological response or something innately in us as women where we feel more comfortable, more satisfied, more at ease when we are the ones addressing our baby's cry. And that's they're biologically built in for a reason. So if we are hearing a crying baby and we think the solution is if someone else could take the baby and then someone else does and we still don't feel right, that's okay. That's our internal mechanisms working. Okay, that's normal. Okay. There's probably other ways that we could be supported by other loved ones, right? Cooking a meal, cleaning up, taking care of older kids, whatever. So I think that that's really a great point, because I don't think that message is being clearly communicated. I think instead it's oh, the baby's stressing you out. Take the baby away from mom.
Yes.
And
totally.
You're saying, you know what? Actually, you're right where you need to be. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about offloading something else mentally and emotionally so that's how your spouse can support you. So I think that's really great that you shared that from your perspective, because I feel that, and I also have seen that play out in other people, and they have this tension of oh, do I just need space?
Not to mention it confuses all of us men, right? Because we're my wife does not trust me, right? I pick up the baby and she's just looking at me and is just give it to me. I'm like,
look,
it's good stuff.
Yeah, that should be reassuring for you as the husband to know we're tethered and that's okay for me to be with babe and address babe. And if you can just take care of me, that's really where you shine.
I had a question. I wrote it down. Is there a point where does that connection begin to taper off?
Oh, yeah. And actually, it's really interesting because a lot of the research around child development is that fathers and mothers stimulate different areas of their baby's brains. So it is the nurture sequence that the mother provides biologically, but the father comes in with the rough and tumble and the giggles and the happiness, which, at times can feel like you're sitting on the side watching, them having their rough house, rowdy moments. And, these are just the role definitions. And you see this play out in nature too. The fathers will often play, the mammal dads, we're speaking in the mammal kingdom, they're not trying to feed the baby as much. They're not really responding to the crying baby as much. They're there to teach them how to fight, essentially, that's what early childhood is about, is how do I instinctually raise you to be able to survive. And we're just out of context in this modern society where so much of what we have now is not about survival, but our instincts and our developing brain still occurs on that same path line of why dads are kind of naturally more of the playful parent and the mother is the nurturing, responding parent, because it just helps the baby differentiate different areas of brain growth. So you're actually doing it exactly right when you allow the dad to be the dad and have the fun moment. And overall, the statistics on postpartum anxiety and depression and even postpartum suicide. So this is why this topic, all of it is sensitive, but all of it matters, because moms are even getting to the point where they want to take their own life, or we have intrusive thoughts about taking the baby with us because you couldn't imagine leaving the baby alone with dad. Not that you don't love dad. It's just people aren't understanding that it's this fluctuation in your hormones that's happening because you're trying to, split those roles, which, you're not getting, like Carrie said, the dopamine and the oxytocin. And then the dad is actually not bonding with the baby either because they are dealing with a crying baby and they don't have the same brain development or the brain structures that the mammalian brain has. So it's all a mismatch, and then moms and dads are mad at each other in the beginning and then the crying baby in the middle, and it's just it doesn't set you up to be a very happy, confident family from the beginning. So yeah, you're doing it exactly right if dad is getting you a magazine or bringing you water or dealing with the kids like you said.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that distinction you guys made. So we talked about birth experience and even just some of that early time kind of remedying maybe a less than ideal birth experience or a stressful birth experience. A key part of that is getting that skin to skin in, which is really practical. I think everyone can kind of take that advice. I love that. I also want to move into some of these categories that are so highly contested and leave a lot of confusion. One of those being sleep. So I'd love to hear what is a sort of normal progression, and we can even go as granular as that first week versus, that first chunk of life, 0 to 3 months, whatever you guys want to do. But talk to me about sleep and where some of the conversation maybe misses the mark and what we should actually be focusing on.
We've actually been talking about this quite a bit now, just because, Jenny just had a baby and she's about to have her next one.
Just have one.
Not just one, but I feel like compared to me, you've been back in baby land more.
Baby land.
And I think especially if you're going to be a first time mom, you have to know that your newborn is not going to sleep how you sleep. And I think just the expectation of just lowering your expectation that it's not just about your sleep habits. It is, but it's also about your baby figuring out what to do in this new world. And so much of what, we've kind of discovered is that people just think so many times, who cares? Babies will just do whatever we do and we can do what we want. And not really taking into account, what are they experiencing for the first time? Is this stressful? Is it not? And so when it comes to sleep, what we like to say is, I would say probably the number one response of new moms is how can I get my baby to nap? How can I get my baby away from me? How can I have my baby sleep on their own? And while there's a time and place for that, what we always tell new moms is babies don't have sleep issues. They have separation issues. They absolutely know how to sleep. Every human does. You are born knowing how to do that, just like you are born knowing how to breathe. And they do not know how to separate from the mother. And if you just take a step back and think, okay, they were continuously connected to you for 9 months, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks out, you're like, okay, this is a lot now. You're up and down. And, they don't know that for 30 plus years, you were going to bed at 8:30 and had an uninterrupted night for 7+ hours. And so I think if we could just pull back a little bit instead of expecting these tiny little babies to do kind of what we do, and just know this is a huge learning curve for them. And I always say, especially in those first 3 months, because the startle reflex is playing such a high role in brain development and sensory processing, how they're taking in this entire world through the night and day. And I think we just think, okay, who cares about the nighttime? Like they can just be swaddled up, put on their back with a sound machine and a pacifier. But babies really don't like that. And they will wake up, they will bust out, the pacifier will fall out. They're literally communicating to you, I just want to be close. And so we want new moms to feel like you can set yourself up safely to support sleep and get more rest, which is what we discovered kind of the hard way. We did the whole crib thing. We did the whole swaddle thing. We did pacifiers. We did it all. And honestly, what we found to be the most, amazing thing for us still to this day is to just bed share and co-sleep.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. And just to talk about these topics, because nobody really hears these different perspectives over time.
Yeah.
You just need to make more informed decisions. Like most people make decisions out of fear, what if X, Y, and Z happens, but what if it doesn't? And what if that's not how it has always been since the beginning of time? And like an analogy that can make that really clear is that because this is all like nervous system based and your biology, and your that little body and your body responding to each other in real time, the further apart you are, the more your cortisol, your stress hormone, is going to be flooding your body, and the same for your baby. So separation actually increases stress. And this is just about survival, because if we were a cave woman, you wouldn't go take your baby and put him in another area of the cave. You would be close to your baby through the night. And even as much as like an adorable wicker bassinet next to your bed is like a separation, a barrier that our minds in the beginning are like, are you kidding? My baby should know I'm right here. But they actually don't. They only have about 10 to 12 inches vision and a limited hearing, and that's all developing as they grow. And so they don't know you're there when you are 5 feet away. Like you're out of sight, you are dead to them until object permanence comes down the road.
Yeah.
So when you are within sensory closeness to your baby, which we find and always recommend the bedside bassinet that goes like no barrier up to your bed, they can be frustrating for making your bed. I mean, it might be a good excuse not to, or getting it up in and out, but just through the night, resting close together will get you more sleep. It's like, why would you want to get out of bed or even sit up in bed? And biologically, like from the beginning of time, babies have just slept with their mothers. So you see that in the monkey kingdom and all mammals, all over kittens. Everything sleeps with their mom. It's your design safety. You have an amygdala change in your brain that makes you hyper aware of your baby in the beginning. So, like what most people immediately want to talk about is like SIDS and things, but SIDS and suffocation are entirely different, and people don't know how to differentiate them. So just if you're wondering, SIDS is specifically an unknown cause. Now you have to do your own parental research into that, but suffocation is so rare and happens in cribs just as frequently as with a bed sharing family. So if you're choosing to sleep away from your baby out of fear that you're going to kill your baby, then that's just like such a narrow shot of like what if anything could happen. Like, the same thing could happen in a crib of it being that narrow of an opportunity for your baby to be suffocated, because biologically your brain is going to keep your baby safe. So as far as sleep goes, that really does take you off track from the very beginning with development, because you're not sleeping through the night, or you're not, you're exhausted. And so you're beginning to like have less functional abilities during the day. You're more, irritable, you're easily upset. Then you start resenting your baby. Then you're wanting to buy another swaddle. And it's just like it just continues down that whole path of like, I need a different product to solve this problem, instead of just realizing your baby just wants to be close.
Yeah, if you really think about comparing like other mammals in the animal kingdom to like modern day 2024 parenting, where we put people in a crib, we snap on the little booty thing that tells us their heart rate and oxygen level.
Yes, that was me.
Because we're paranoid, right? And like we want distance, but we want to also have data. And it does create this spiraling anxiety of like, you're probably battling your own biology by being separate, but then you're trying to combat that by getting the information on your phone. Then you don't even like want to consider the EMF, all of those repercussions. Right. So and that's what you're talking about, those baby gadgets. So no wonder we are so overstimulated as moms, right? Yeah. My thing, and I'd love to talk about this. So I have never co-slept. I can barely even sleep next to Joey. I'm sorry, at this point, his breathing, it just wakes me up. Like, we have a queen bed, like we're not living in luxury over here. And so I don't want to be, I love you. I don't want the baby in our room.
That's fair.
What I want to do is I have a bed set up in our nursery. And so I plan to sleep close to baby that way because it's more conducive. I don't want him waking me up. It's not even about me waking him up, honestly. It's just him waking me up at this point.
I've been training you for this moment for years.
You really have. So I guess what I'm saying is, can it look different from just having a bedside bassinet in your master bedroom? Like, is it just important that mom and baby are close together? Because I do kind of run into this, like, I feel bad that I'm not co-sleeping in the traditional manner, but I also like know that it won't work for our family. So is that still checking the box? Is there something else I should consider? Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I actually love that you say that, because really the thing about it is that what works for you works. Yeah. You know, I mean, you don't have to subscribe to everything being exactly like, you know, it's recommended or, you know, what we suggest, because that is what social media does now, is like, it's too much information. And sometimes you hear something different and you're like, oh, red alarm, now I'm not doing it right. But if it works for your family, it does. And, you know, that's the best indicator. We teach this in our method for newborns. It's actually one of the pillars, is that your instincts will always inform you what is right for you and your baby. So as long as you're not, you know, if you just follow what feels right, and you will do what's right. It's just that the advice around that is like, you're not doing it right, but you have to trust yourself to guide yourself. And so, if that works, you know, then why change what has worked for you guys? Just knowing that it's just about being responsive and being there for your baby.
Agreed.
Totally. I love that. Let's talk about the swaddle thing, because this was one of those like mind blowing. I had always wrapped my babies tight with their arms down. When I learned from you all that maybe that was inhibiting something very important. So walk us through swaddling and why maybe it's not the best idea.
Okay. And we were the same. Like, I probably had 5 different ones. I mean, tightly trying to Houdini my baby, and she actually hated them. She would bust out of them, and I was so like just stressed, thinking like there's something wrong with her, because like my friends' babies, some of them like the swaddle, or they'd be like, buy this one, you know, like it's fine. And I would, you know, no problem. But I was just so internally stressed because it was like she hated it, couldn't get her to sleep. I was just like, you know, not even focusing on what the stuff we talk about now. And what the thing is about the swaddle is that the Moro reflex, the startle reflex, is probably the hallmark of just the baby's brain in those first 3 months and throughout the rest of your life. It is really what's going to keep your system on alert and freaked out all the time. Or are you able to take in this world, make adjustments, react appropriately from what you've been exposed to? And what people just don't understand, and mainly like baby product companies, is the brain development side of the startle reflex. They just see, oh, the arms are flailing, let's make something to
wake the baby.
Yeah, it's going to wake the baby up. Without even regard to why is it doing that? Like, there would, you know, and it's absolutely fascinating because it is a built-in survival mechanism for your baby, because again, they're trying to learn about their world in a sensory experience through sight, sound, movement, touch. And so when a baby startles from whatever, from the movement, the hair dryer, the dog barked, anything, you know, in those first few weeks, it's very heightened. They're making a connection through the arms that go up, that come back down. And it's the entire movement that the brain and body have to go through together. And when you suppress the movement, that gets stored down into the nervous system. And so that's why we always say the arms need to be free, or just skip it altogether, because people say, okay, well, they can just do it during the day, but there's a reason they're doing it all the time. We don't know. It's thousands of repetitions per second. They're making 1 million connections per second in their brain about their world. And so what we've noticed is that if you skip swaddling, babies' startle reflex begins to fade faster, because they're able to take in the information and go, okay, I'm safe. The saber-toothed tiger is not the same as the dishwasher going, you know, the dryer door shutting. I'm okay. I'm in this new world. And so just knowing that information can be really empowering for a mom, because it's like, it's not actually required that you have to swaddle your newborn, you know, and because so many babies hate it, they love movement, and movement is what builds the brain. allowing your baby as much movement in that newborn time period is crucial. You know, what you saying?
Yeah. And I think, like you said earlier with your third baby, like you got to see the difference in just how, you know, when you build a house, I don't know, I'm not a builder. I don't know why I went with this analogy, but when you give the foundation its firmest, you know, beginning, then, you know, everything else just grows, or, you know, it stacks up without being, you know, I love the word you use, resilient, sturdy. Like that's what you want for your child's body. And it all begins with that reflex, because in the womb, you know, we know the fetal position is flexion, where they're all curled up. Yeah. And actually, it is the startle that moves them out, if that makes sense. Like if you see the motion of the hands coming out, it actually strengthens the back of the neck, the back of the back, all of it. So it is that movement pattern that begins to open their body up. And in the most simplistic way of thinking about your baby, without knowing one reflex, without knowing one hormone, movement builds the brain. And so the baby is cramped for 9 months as they're in the womb. We don't want to replicate the womb, which is what most people are told to do. Of course, you want to respond to your baby, make your baby feel safe, but you're not trying to give them a cramped environment anymore. You actually want their body to expand outward and be able to use it. And then like what you saw at 4 months is that when their brain has the opportunity to just move naturally, they get going sooner. And this is like the best kept secret in parenting, is that, you know, we all love our babies and our kids, but we do want them to be able to go and play and move on, because as an adult, we don't have child brains anymore. And we don't like to stack blocks all day or, you know, do all the games. It's fine to participate. And this is going to sound, you know, I hope you get it. But the sooner your baby gets going, they take themselves where they want to go, point A to point B, but they rely on you up until the moment that they can figure out how to get themselves there. So if your whole goal in parenting of your tiny baby is like, I'm here for you, baby, and let's get you going, then your baby will get going faster. And then what you see is that they're less needy. Like they don't have those intensive early baby needs, because they get really excited to go chase that red ball around the living room, and you're not sitting there next to them trying to figure out how to entertain them, which essentially is very draining, because it's a mismatch. Like we're not meant to play all day. Or I know what that sounds, you know what I mean? Well, I play with my kids.
And I would say, I think around like the 8, 9, 10 month mark, it's like they're almost ready to go. But like, say if they've been swaddled or sat in containers for a while, then you're trying to find like another contraption to hold them up, you know, when they could just essentially be getting going themselves. And then you're stressed thinking like, when's this baby going to do anything, you know? So.
Yeah, that's such good insight, because it's almost like your baby almost matures at the more appropriate rate, and so you're not left filling in this like entertainment gap, and so you have just naturally a less fussy baby, because they're happier, because they can do things on their own. They're not as frustrated. I 100% saw that in our third. So we've said the word baby container a few times, and people are probably so confused. So let's get into it. Right? Is this Tupperware? Talk to us. It's in the same vein as the swaddle. So talk to us about what baby containers are and what you mean by that, and how they can be playing a role in our child's development.
Okay, so a baby container is like a seat or a contraption that you buy that holds your baby in a position that they can't hold themselves in. So usually it starts with like a reclined baby bouncer. And like I said earlier, you can do as much of these things as you want. It's only about the awareness for your family, and really like having a little bit of the bigger picture in mind, because like we said, either you're going to end up entertaining your baby a long time, and that's a road you can go down, or you can do what most people, it just all comes into this perfect circle that I'm going to circle back to the baby container thing, is you get off track freaking out about sleep all night. You're buying the swaddle, your baby's not moving. Then your baby isn't moving as much. So now they need a bouncer, and then they need another sit me up, and then they need another exerciser. And instead, if you just realized your baby will sleep more soundly, startling normally, responding, getting that brain growth, then you move past the baby sleep thing and you realize that what human babies are meant to do, like all mammal babies, is they come out, even with the umbilical cord attached, if they're set on the mother's baby, those reflexes that just got turned on through the birth canal will help them crawl to self-latch. And so a lot of breastfeeding issues that go awry is because babies aren't getting what they call the breast crawl, which is where the little feet will knead into the stomach. It will start to shrink the uterus because that makes the contraction start back up after birth to bring the uterus back down to size. So a lot of times, like, women are just given Pitocin right away, or like they're going to assume that there's just like a lot of things that are immediately jumped on before you let the natural process occur. But if the baby crawls up by themselves, which it doesn't happen as much in our modern society, but it's like a hallmark of like the Inuits of the Alaskans, is that they will not touch the baby until the baby has crawled with zero assistance to the mother's breast. Wow. And from there, we already discussed how many things go off track when we just don't follow. Usually they're taken to the side, the cord is cut, they're starting to poke and prod, and things are beginning to move in a different direction. But back to baby containers is that if you're not stressed about sleep and your baby's going to wake up to look for you, and you're able to wrap your mind around, I'm going to have less sleep, but there's situations like the bed in the nursery or a bedside bassinet that can help me get more rest, then what I really can be focusing on as a new mom is getting my baby to move as much as possible, which means a baby can't move on their back. And in fact, many times we see flattening of the head. And if you know what that looks like, it basically is like the little head isn't round in the back. You see it at Walmart or Target, like with these babies that spend all their time in like Dunas and car seats, and then they move from the car seat into another type of hold the baby situation. There's so much pressure happening on the back of the head that they end up in helmets. The helmet rate is like astronomical now down the road. People are having to reshape their baby's heads simply because they laid on their back too long. And a lot of that is from the Back to Sleep campaign, which many people have different messages about that, because in the 80s and the 90s, mothers were told to sleep their babies only on their stomach because if they vomited through the night, they would choke and die. So mothers were paranoid to put their babies on their back because they thought they would choke if they were. And that definitely makes sense physiologically. So we have this fear of the baby being on the tummy, but it's actually the natural position to crawl. You can't crawl like on your back. And so if your newborn can crawl from the beginning, there would literally be no reason to ever lay them on their back unless you're like, holding them in your arms, feeding them. It's like we decide for ourselves, you don't need to be on your back. It's just like this mental game we play with ourselves. Like, I have to turn my baby over, but the rightful position for brain development is tummy down, and no baby seat encourages that. Yeah. I'm running out of breath, so I'm gonna let you that makes it go from there.
Just back to baby containers. I think it's more just like new moms just really don't know what to do with a newborn. It's like, what do I do with this baby? Like, they're awake for about 15 minutes maybe. So what can I actually do? And that is where we were fueled to like help new moms know there are actually some great things you can be doing while your newborn's awake that will make a difference in terms of how they will meet their milestones that whole year. And it is, like Jenny said, all just the awareness. Like, if you're listening and you've used a baby container, like, it's okay. Like, don't beat yourself up. We were all there. We all just learned together as moms. And that's what we love about this. It's just your awareness. So like, just tuning in and observing your baby, seeing their head shape, like just even knowing to look at that. Some moms like, I didn't even know, Yeah. And so it's the awareness of like, okay, I may be doing a little bit too much here, and I may be needing to get more movement here, because then, like Jenny says, it'll just snowball down. You'll be looking for another container. Your baby may not walk when they're supposed to, and you're going to be like trying to entertain them for over a year, carrying them around, honestly.
He didn't walk till 18 months. Yeah. So that's a long time to carry a heavy kid. And not that we don't want to carry our babies. It's not that.
No, but they're capable of doing
what you want for them.
Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think that was the biggest light bulb moment for me watching Ray, was like, oh, kids are capable earlier than I thought.
Yes.
And so I think that's the thing. You see these moms who are stuck, and they're like, their baby's their baby's maybe not turning over.
Yes.
And so then they're like paranoid about sleep because they're still, I mean, my babies always sleep better on their stomach.
Right.
And even if I set the baby on the back, starting at like, I don't know, a month or two, they're rolling to their stomach anyways because they instinctively sleep better there. And once they roll, I never put them back on their back. And so we live in this weird thing where it's like, well, maybe baby wasn't rolling, or maybe they were strapped in because they were in like a snoo or a bassinet that locks them into back laying position. And those are so common, and people like, they praise, oh, it shakes and the baby is soothed at night. And it's like, okay, well, that's one side of the story, but maybe the other side of the story is like, okay, well, what's happening during that developmental period where baby's not allowed to sleep on their belly? And then we ran into the back to sleep campaign where everyone is now like, you must sleep on your back, otherwise your baby will die. But then at the same time, make sure you're doing tummy time, and it's like all very confusing. And I think one thing I learned from you all is like tummy time should more so like be the default. And then like there are moments where like, I lay my baby down in a bassinet. I'm not 100% contact napping, but like I'm also not afraid of like allowing my baby's movement. So I think something you guys have said through this show that's been really helpful is like, movement nourishes a baby. And if you can focus on getting that good movement in during the day and maybe drop some of your unrealistic expectations of sleep at night, those two things pair really well.
Yeah, very well.
And I think that alone is going to like set so many people up for amazing like newborn experiences. I'm looking on my list because I'm like, what have we not covered? One other thing that we haven't really dialed in on is the whole idea of milestones. So like, how do you guys feel about like crawling milestones, walking milestones, and are those things we should be paying attention to? What should we do if we see that we're not meeting milestones? Like, walk me through that.
Well, that is like one of the best things about all of this is because what we have actually talked about a lot of times is what happens when you go off track and your baby is down the road being overweight and not moving. But what people don't know just in general is that development, while it can be delayed and slowed down, it can also essentially be sped up because it's just a product of the baby's brain and what it's experiencing. So we like to think of milestones as the evidence of your baby's brain growing. Like it shows that they've met something new, and that all happens through connections. And if you think about the brain like a ladder, like it has to have every step of the way up in order to meet another milestone. And so when you see a baby not meeting a milestone, you just know that they're lower down in their brain and they need more stimulation in order to get to that next one. And the best part about all of that is that you actually have to do nothing. Like if you just put your baby on their tummy and work with them on the floor, and the sooner you start, which you can accommodate them to being, on a padded surface on the floor. We get this a lot from multiple moms, but how do I do that with a lot of kids around? It really, I found even with my third baby, and you have those teaching moments, but like basically eventually people just realize the baby's going to be on the floor, so you just don't step on it. You put it to the side, or you have a little mat or quilt, or in different most high traffic areas of the house, and you just realize that okay, like if the baby's awake and it's time, and everything else is covered, the diaper, the feed, if I just work on getting them adjusted to being on the floor, moving around, they'll take off faster. And so that is the remedy for everything down the road if you find your baby isn't beginning to roll or sit up or crawl. And how vital they are is actually, again, the foundation of the baby and the adult brain. So this is going to sound wild, but when people as full adults are having issues with like anxiety, I don't know, there's ADHD, like literally almost every diagnosis under the sun are actually just gaps in early brain development. And there's a researcher called Dr. Harold Blomberg, and he actually takes adults and puts them back through infant movement patterns, which is like essentially you have to go be a baby again, but not in some weird psychotherapy way. It's actually in the physical movements of like crawling for right and left sides of the body, and filling in the movement gaps that they missed out on in that first year. And when we started implementing that at our therapy clinic, it was just astronomical, the difference that we began to see in kids that were having a hard time with handwriting and learning disorders and behavior problems. It's just like we've gotten so far away from how the brain actually develops by moving on the tummy, on the floor, that when those gaps show up down the road, we've come up with these labels for it. And it's actually goes back to, you told me you were a sensitive sleeper. I don't know what your relationship with your family is, but you can discover from your mom, what was your birth story and how did she respond to you as a baby? And the sensitivity of your nervous system is related to you as an adult being like aware of your environment through the night, like hearing Joe breathe. You might be a little bit of a, I don't want to call you high strung because I don't know you, but you can just decide for yourself, like these temperaments that we come up against. When somebody is just a little bit more fussy, more sensitive, just more low threshold for things, not bomb proof, then they probably have a nervous system that has little gaps in their movement as an infant. And you can actually go back in, and we did this with older children. We have to imitate the startle, and we imitate other newborn movement patterns, and then they begin to, all of it goes away. Like the sensitivity, the attention deficits, because it's really just a matter of brain development. Like your brain needs to go through these crucial movements. And then when it doesn't, we see a long-term repercussion from it.
Wow.
Well, and I would just add too about milestones. I think so many people think they're just so age-based. Like, okay, my baby's 6 months, so now they're going to sit up and they're going to do all these things. And at 10 months, they're going to pull the stand. And while generally sometimes that does happen, what we've noticed is that newborns that have been given a lot of free movement from the beginning, like you've seen, actually meet them faster. So it's actually what we have discovered. It's not just age-related. It's stimulation and movement related and the environment that they're in. And that's what's so exciting, because you know, when moms write in, they're like, is something wrong? My baby started rocking on her knees at 4 months. Is this okay? We're like, yes, it's great, you know, and that's what you would want, you know, and not so far like thinking, okay, it's just this age. Now they have to do it because it's this age. It's really based on what your baby's exposed to.
And just know, like, what you saw with your third should totally validate y'all as parents. Like, that wasn't by accident. Like, you did that for her because you didn't know what you were doing with your first, but changing that, you know, responsive environment to them makes them become a whole different person.
Yeah.
This fourth baby is I'm nervous. I'm scared about like, what we're going to see. I think so. If I understand what you're saying, it's more important, back to the ladder analogy, that they're hitting things in a particular order. Like, you don't want to see kids like walk before they've crawled, right?
Right.
And it's less about timeline and more about, are they hitting their correct milestones rung by rung? You don't want them skipping levels.
Right.
But then it's also showing you the depth of their kind of neurodevelopment. So if they're not leaning into a new milestone, that doesn't have to freak you out, but it can give you some insight into like, hey, let's work on this a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's
more information.
Yes, totally.
Yes. The coolest part about all of this is that you can do this as a parent. Like, this is so easy. This is like your baby just moving around. Isn't this crazy? All this scientific talk about like all your baby needs to do is move around, and they become a phenomenal kid. Like, you will watch your third baby continue, or your third and your fourth. You will see this. I still marvel at the difference between like my first child, who did have the squeeze, but had anesthesia and had me as a first time mom. Bless his little uncoordinated heart. You know, I still try to we have to get back on the floor and crawl with him, because like I said, he didn't crawl for that whole first year. And so this stuff is not all that crazy, even though it can sound very in depth. It's like neurology and brain and all this, but really we're talking about let your baby move and you're going to be set as a parent.
Yeah. And I think just knowing like it's so much easier to do it with a baby than trying to convince like an older kid who's not really interested in doing this anymore. Like, hey, can you want to crawl?
I don't want to crawl.
You know, it's so much easier to do all this in the first year because they want to do it anyway. They want to move around and wiggle and all that. So that's more.
I love that. I'm going to go make our 8-year-old crawl around the kitchen island a couple times, do a couple laps, make it her daily routine.
They say there's a great Instagram account called Into the Cortex, which explains like why crawling is so crucial is because you're
So
really
good.
setting the right and left sides of the body versus and the top and the bottom. So how to differentiate in the brain, the body parts, and then how to bring that all back together. So they assess crawls.
Yeah.
So you can, as an adult, do a crawling video for them, and they'll tell you in your brain like where you went off track, and actually tell you how much you need to crawl. Like they'll give you a prescription for crawling.
That's awesome.
That will actually begin to address those deficits, like the attention thing and sensitivity. Like so much of it, it's just like so bizarre how many things get affected when that step is skipped. And so you can just always know that, like, no matter what happened, the most scary birth that, you know, wasn't ideal, and the longest swaddled baby. We have had babies in our clinic that come in swaddled at 6 months old. Like people just don't know, you know, like what to do. So even if you did everything listed as like, you know, I don't want to say wrong, but just off track, you can always go back and replace the movement in the body, and the brain will pick it up, and it will take it into the next level of development. So you're never at a loss. We just know it's much easier as therapists to do it sooner than later.
Yeah, that's great encouragement. I'd love to let Joey kind of
Poor Joey
share
listen.
his thoughts. Yeah, I know. Whenever he's silent for a lot of the episode, I'm always like, I know he's stewing in his brain. So do you have any questions, or like, what are your thoughts?
I did want to drop a pin on, I think a lot of men out there will also resonate with this, that crying tends to be this thing where mothers hear something and feel something, and they're inert, or their inner kind of core tells them, I need to address this.
Yeah.
And men, I believe, oftentimes, speaking out of experience, will feel this opportunity.
Yeah.
And I would love to know, is there a moment or a time where addressing a child, okay, I'm just wondering if there's an age where we do want them to self-regulate some, because my inner like being, that like how to protect yourself, how to stay alive, that like how to fight, and it's I want you to be able to address this on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a lot of don't do that, and so I just wanted to ask that question, and I'm happy to be wrong.
I think that's great, because I think that's how actually my husband thinks a lot of the times. Like I will freak out about, you know, the crying situation, even like as my kids are older, and he's, you know, more like
he's rolling his eyes.
Let's just pull back for a second. And I do think a lot of that is just nuance between a mother and a dad. And if I hadn't been in the picture, the way he handles things is different than how I do, but our children respond to him differently than they do me. And so I do think you do have to take into account like just your own personal relationship with each child. I will say in the first 3 years, and probably a little bit beyond, I mean, children don't really have any ability to regulate themselves, like just emotionally, like even though you know they're smart, which kids are, the emotional component, because like they call it procedural learning, is happening in the first 3 years, which is like, I'm learning the procedures of life. Like when I cry, is somebody responding to me? When I do this, am I getting in trouble? What's the procedure when I'm hurt? What's the procedure if I'm scared? And so it's this procedural thing that's happening in the brain up until about 3 years, that I think around people just get kind of like really frustrated at like terrible twos. And they're like, oh, this is so crazy. Tantrums, meltdowns. But there's so much brain growth happening in that time that it's okay to constantly be responding to them or be extremely nurturing to them and like following just your instinctual path, you know, depending on whatever the situation is. I think, you know, there's not just like this age of like, okay, now you can stop, but you will begin to notice just in the maturity of it that they are able to, I don't know, co-regulate it.
Well, and I think in y'all's season of parenting, if I may, without knowing anything about your kids other than what you've described, I would imagine it's your first that is the most tearful of your children, or not. I'm sorry, was it your breech C-section? Yeah. Whichever one that you find has the highest sensitivity and seems to have the longest, like, return to normal after they've been set off, like where you get to the point as a parent and you're like, okay, you've cried enough. The one way to approach that yourself without getting all in your head about like, am I doing this the right way or wrong way, is just actually detaching yourself from what you think those tears mean. Because every nervous system is different based on the early experiences that it has had. So if you know your child has had a alternative experience early on, they're more likely to be sensitive as an older child. It's that little gap of the tracks, like they went this way instead of this way. So they're more sensitive, which makes them actually show you they are brain development lower, not like get scared,
not intelligent.
They're reacting more like a younger child than an older child because the brain hasn't made all the connections yet, which like when you said, I need to get the 8-year-old crawling, that all those physical activities help with that emotional resilience because it fills the brain back in. But when an older child cries and kind of looks like a younger child, that's emotional immaturity. And if you can detach yourself from it being annoying and like you need to shut this down because you're older, then what you can think about crying is that it's the emotional release from stress. And it would be no different than, say, Joe, we're just going to pick on you. Joe's upset and he's crying. And you come in and you go, okay, I'm listening, I'm supporting you, I hear you. And then like after about 10 minutes of Joe crying, Joe, it's time for you to like stop crying now. Like it just doesn't, we don't do that to each other as adults. Like we don't shut each other down emotionally, but we do with our children because it's like, we decide in our minds, okay, I've dealt with this. I've been a nice parent to you. And then I've been an irritated parent to you. And then I flip flop back and now I'm trying to be understanding of you. But it means nothing about us. And it means everything about their nervous system. And so tears release cortisol. And if you're that stress hormone is going to build up from whatever the reaction is. It's the wrong color sock. It's, it's like I have to get up and go and I don't want to go, or I didn't want to eat that. Whatever stress their little body's feeling, it's going to build up. And if it erupts in tears, that's because the stress hormone has gotten so high in their body that now it needs to physically come out. And that's how the body releases it, is through the tears. They've measured that in studies. They find that those tears are full of the hormone cortisol. And so what you can know is it's okay to cry. Like just let it all out, let it flow out. No judgment from me. You can definitely give, feedback, the procedures of like, it's okay to cry, but we can't scream here, or I'll give you a hug when you're crying. It's just important to be like, the tears mean nothing. The tears are the release, just like when you're done crying, which Joe, however your parents handled you, I don't know. But if you were told as a child to shut your tears down because they bothered your parent after a while, then that same brain development is buried into your brain when you're responding to your kid. Like, well, after a while, I wasn't allowed to cry. And so now you need to not cry. And it's just like how it gets passed down through cycles of like not understanding what creates emotional maturity is like, your emotions are separate from my emotions. And as the parent, you're looking at me for the stability, the calm, the quiet. I'm a pillar of like emotional, you can't disturb me. And that's the hardest work as a parent. Like your emotions don't disturb my emotions because I'm in control of me, and you watch me control myself, and then you learn how to control yourself. I don't have to tell you anything. I don't have to do anything to you. I just have to be here, even in silence, and just resilience. And like, you let it out. I'm here. We're good with your tears. And when you begin to do that for your child over and over and over again, they will still cry for long periods, but they will begin to model what they see, which is it's okay to cry, but then like, I only need to cry to release and then it's done. And we don't ever do that to adults. Like we said, like if your friend started crying, you wouldn't be like, okay, that's enough now. That's enough now. Now I told you I can't handle these tears. We do, we try to distract people and we try to, hug people, which we know as all of it is. But it's just like, as a parent, you just have to detach from it because it's just an emotional release. And it doesn't mean you're a bad parent or they're a bad kid. Yeah. They just need to let it out, and you just need to be the rock. Like just no reaction about that being a sign of them incompetent. They're actually just releasing.
I think the helpful thing for me too is like, I don't have that same mental battle with all my kids. Like I said, my third, when she cries, she cries so rarely that I know that this sounds bad.
Has more significance.
I know it has meaning. Yeah, I know it has significance. Whereas I will see in my middle, who is older, a cry might look like just pure frustration. It's not attached to something physical. And I think if I've learned anything from this show, it's that, there are some gaps we could probably go backfill.
Yeah,
and I think the more we do that, then we might see some of those symptomatic. It's not even like crying that bothers me. It's the whining, frankly.
It's
like
the whining.
Yeah, it just feels like disrespect. It feels like an in control, like it feels like an immature emotional response that's inappropriate for her age.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like what you're saying is like that kind of is where her mental emotional capacity is. So to look at it, separate yourself and be like, yeah, this is giving me some insight into who you are right now. I can be sad as the parent that you're not as far on in this journey as I want you to be.
Sure.
But then to not just sit there, but to maybe think of like, okay, well, what else could we be doing to help facilitate her emotional growth? That's not just yelling at her in the moment. Like, how can we help support her? Like, is there a movement we can do with her? Is there like, she's so intellectual. Can we have a conversation with her about what this looks like? And if that clicks with her, I just think that's the hardest part right now in our parenting journey is figuring out how to fill in those gaps.
Last crying question and scenario. I want to pose it as a scenario because I feel like every parent deals with this. If they don't, please talk to me. Kid, I'll use myself as the example still. Every time I want to go hunting, I come to this is the scenario. This doesn't actually happen, just to be very clear. Every time I want to go hunting or do something that I want to do, go play poker or whatever, I come to Elizabeth and she says no. And so then the immediate response I would have in this scenario is that I would cry. And I would cry and I'd stomp around and then Elizabeth would say, okay, you can go. And I go, okay. And I pop out of my crying and I go jump in the truck and I go out to the woods. This is a crying response, right? Okay. And I'm just curious, is this a moment where we need to address that crying differently than I have the wrong sock?
Oh, I see what you're saying. You want to go for it? I think it actually, and
it just reminds me so much of milling.
Like
y'all are like seriously how I like when we're dealing with our first. So
you have to be, and this isn't an insult on any level, but what parents get better at is knowing that you're smarter than the child. So our brains hear no from infancy onward so frequently. No, don't touch that. No, you can't have that. No, don't put that in your mouth. That we're hardwired to resist that immediate response as a young child, especially one that is sensitive or is emotionally immature. So if the shutdown happens when I request something, then I lose emotional control because I've been shut down. So what I mean is being smarter than the child is knowing that you might say, okay, Joe comes to Liz and say, I want to go play poker. And Liz goes, no. Joe cries. So what Liz says is, Joe, you want to play poker? That's a lot of fun. You can do that tomorrow. It's like you didn't say no. You gave him the answer is yes. It's just not right now. And you might still get tears, but it's just sometimes the way we phrase things to each other that actually creates a shutdown moment or creates like a permission at a different time.
I would say with my almost 8-year-old, who is the more highly sensitive, high strung, hard to transition, just different, more emotional immaturity than our 5-year-old. I would say being very clever around just the word no. And I think we've just been hardwired as people like, oh, they got to be able to deal with it. They will know how to deal with it. But like as their brain is growing, the more creative you could just be like in just side swiping. If you know the word no is going to shut them down.
It's a trigger.
Yeah, it's a trigger. So you could just be like, hey, how about tomorrow you do this? Or next time when you go over here, do this. And then they're like, oh, well, it's not really no yet. It means it might be coming. It's just not now.
Find a way to say yes that means no.
Yeah.
Like, well, poker and validating feelings are also good because most of the time you're excited. You want to go meet the guys for poker. And then to hear that immediate shutdown, I really doubt you're going to be like, okay, Liz, let's go to dinner. You're going to have an emotional response to it as well, which is like irritation. Maybe it'll cause a fight. You didn't get to go last time. There's a lot of like emotional feelings around being shut down around something that you want to do. And the same happens in our kids. So when you can find a way to say yes, like, well, maybe tomorrow, and it does take a little bit of practice because we just want to be like, not today, not right now.
No.
It's just about understanding that you can always give permission about, or you can validate the feeling of like, oh, I bet that would be so fun to go color on the walls. But right now we don't do that at grandma's house. We don't do that at our house. That's a silly example, but you have to be smarter than the kid, and realizing that no's a trigger for everybody means that you get smarter about the way you respond in shutting them down, or you redirect into, well, we can't do that right now, but we can play this game, or we can go outside, or we can go to the park, or we'll get ice cream. But I know, and I totally relate to, so annoying when they just default to the crying. And then because the crying is a trigger for us as well, based on how our parents handled it, then we just want to give in to them. And then it does create that cycle of like, they seem to know that if they cry, they're going to get their way. And then it gets, now we're getting into like this vicious cycle of like, I can't handle your tears now. Now I got to give it to you. But then it feels, it's a dopamine hit for your kid to stop crying. Like, you validated yourself too. Like, you were getting the ickies along with your kid. Now both of your ickies are solved because you did the quick fix. And then as that cycle repeats, then, you're getting stronger neuronal connections around like, I can instantly result to tears instead of like, so if you can just avoid the no altogether, that generally, helps from the beginning to break the cycle up of like, they default to the tears, right away.
I will just add really quickly, especially because the nervous system and all the emotional heightened sensitivities and everything, what we've seen too is that, you like sensory sensitive kids, or kids that are just a little bit more high strung, want more control than normal.
Yeah.
And so any way that you can offer them control will actually help them. And I'm talking like, you could give them the same 2 spoons. They could be the exact same, and walk up to them and be like, okay, which spoon would you like? They will pick one, because it's like, they are autonomous, they're independent. And so any little way you can make them feel more in control of their environment, because I mean, if we face it, kids don't really have any control of what they do. They are at the mercy of their parents all the time, and they're beginning to be independent and wanting to do all these things that they're either going to hear no about or shut down about. So in all the different ways, if you can, like throughout your day, just think, okay, which paper do you want? It could be the same paper. I've done it so many times, and every kid I've done it to always picks something and they smile. It's like, you're honoring the fact that like, you're a person, you can make a choice about something, and here you go. And so the more kind of little control you can give your kids, even just like throughout the day, is very helpful too. We've noticed, just behaviorally and like emotionally. What can I give them that will let them feel like they're getting to make a decision here? And a lot of times that will.
And just to bring that into the Joe scenario, here's how you shut Joe down without Joe crying. He says, I want to go play poker. And you say, that sounds really fun. Do you want to do that Saturday night or Sunday night?
Not tonight.
It's just Saturday or Sunday. Now you get to pick, and I get it that not every scenario is going to be an like you're going to get to go, but you could say something like, well, Joe, that does sound fun, but what about ice cream or playing in the backyard? Still no, but you still get to make a choice about something that as a parent is going to be still fun, still something they're looking to do.
Making the choice has been very, very helpful.
Choices help, and clever yes nos.
Clever yes nos
for older children.
I like
I think what I also want to illuminate a little bit here, just again, what I've seen in my own kids, is that like, the goal is to not have a child who is constantly being perceived as manipulative with their crying. I think dads a lot of the time go there, and I do too. I mean, if my kid is 5 and older and you're whining and crying at me until you get what you want, my maternal brain says you're manipulating me. But I think what we're also addressing here is that a lot of these kids, while it's very common for kids to respond that way, these kids probably have a neurological or emotional response delay or gap, right, from all the things we've talked about. So the goal is to have like the Rays of the world, right, who we can look at and we can just say, no, not right now. And she'll be like, okay. And I think that it's crazy, like people hear me say that and they're like, there's no way. But I'm like, no, if you have a child who has emotional resilience, unlike what you've seen in your previous experiences, you start to really believe that there is deep-rooted biology behind their emotional response.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's less of like, oh, we need to honor every whiny kid and like wipe their butt, make them happy all the time. We have to recognize that, like, one, that's a diagnostic tool we can use as parents to say, ooh, you're a little more sensitive than I would
You're
have
on
thought
it.
you would be.
You
Yeah,
got
like
it exactly.
in your stage of life. So we can separate ourselves and we can be like, okay, you're a little more sensitive. That's okay. We can bridge that gap for you. Also, in the moment, to not stoke a fire unnecessarily. And I love what you said about the dopamine hit, about how they can be trained to utilize crying to get a quick response, to then get a hit of dopamine. That again is such a like intrinsic system in their body that parents aren't really aware of, right? I would have never thought about that. So recognizing twofold, like the goal is to have kids mature out of that cycle. You don't want a 16-year-old crying at you every time you tell them no, but also recognize, like, while that child is showing some immaturity in this area, we don't have to stiff arm them as parents and be like, I'm the masculine, you're, I'm not saying you do that. And we can meet them where they are, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's
and
like,
I'll just say too, one thing that really helps, like what you were observing, you actually nailed it perfectly, Liz. Like you got it 100%. And when your 2-year-old whines and cries, you have a certain like resilient. You understand emotionally that, nah, you're 2, I know you're mad you didn't get that ball, but like as your kid moves on and they get older, you tend to have this idea that, okay, you're done having an immature reaction. You're older now. However, if they have not matured physically, which is what matures the brain, the body drives the brain, then that's why you see that as an older child crying like a 2-3-year-old, because they haven't made that leap yet in their brain. So another way to get all around like the emotional talk and like, trying to get clever with your yes nos is your older child getting enough movement? Because we all know if they spend a day at the pool, you might have some tears around a popsicle or leaving, but they generally, when the body has been used up physically, they have a calmness about them. They go to sleep easier. And we're just kind of like stagnant in our modern lifestyles. Like we sit on the couch a lot. We watch a lot of shows. We don't get our kids moving, from infancy onward. And so like, if you're seeing emotional immaturity as a child, even one route, if you're feeling super triggered around the crying, is can you be, as a family, involved about getting outside, taking afternoon walks, getting into not necessarily sports, like you don't have to go to practice 3 nights a week, but just like thinking very intentionally about, did my child move a lot today? Did they get the input that their brain needs to feel more calm, more organized? Because movement drives all the organization of our brain. And if that's where the gap is, then just getting them going and moving, where you can think about like filling their cup up. Like if you've got a really tearful child and by the end of the day, they're usually set off by something, then they didn't get their cup filled in terms of like body movement. So a lot of this it feels like very, I got to be thinking all the time about how I'm going to respond to my kid, like clever yes, nos, or am I keeping them active? Like, do they have time to cry and fuss and like make the whining, which obviously as parents, like we all have those, Saturdays where we're laying at home all day, but it's just like awareness is like what we're about, because all this stuff is so simple. Like if you keep your kid physically busy, you start them off moving soon, your third, you will be astounded as they grow. You're not going to have a tearful 8-year-old, 9-year-old, the teenager is going to be way more easy. Your third is going to be like, whoa, like I wish we had known this sooner. And you already see that now as a 4-year-old versus your older children. That's just pure brain and body maturity occurring at the right stage versus not having the full picture with, your older kids. And so, lots of movement and lots of being smarter than the kid can really help navigate some of those irritable parent moments, which we all have.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Wow. This has been so helpful. You guys, I feel like you have cleared so many fuzzy parts of my parenting lens. So thank you so much for that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're all
happy.
learning,
Yeah.
and it's fun to know that this is not hard to do. Like you can hear a different way and just like make changes today. Like just your responses can be totally different, and you begin to see a different child because of it.
Yes.
Yeah, I love
Absolutely.
that. Will you share with the audience where they can find you guys and learn more of this information?
We do. We have a Instagram page, On Track Baby. You can just find us there. And that is basically where we help first-time moms navigate just this newborn time period when everything goes kind of crazy for a second. And we want new moms to avoid that postpartum stress that basically we felt. But we're really just over there on Instagram.
Well, and we have a newborns course that, ideally like in third trimester is the best, because then you can actually know on day one about things to do with your newborn.
Yeah.
But you can always catch up. It is only for 12 weeks and under, because I mean, of all the fascinating topics about babyhood, we also know that like a new baby is in a fetus-like state. There's a lot of theories around this, which are just so mind-blowing about like why a newborn is so hard to deal with. But essentially what we know is that they're basically in a fetal state for the first 12 weeks. Yeah. That's why they don't really laugh and giggle, and they can't move, and they tend to be highly irritable or very easily offset. And because they're not really human at that point, they're from, another, and feels like that. Yeah, the theory around it are just come from the beginning of time. Like, and so you just need to know that if your baby doesn't, you don't feel bonded, or your baby feels really hard to deal with in the beginning, that is because they aren't quite human. It happens around the end of 12 weeks that you begin to see that giggling, glowing, and then within about 4 weeks after that, like your 4-month-old was doing, they're taking off. And so it's just like understanding this part is so crucial to being a happier, like less stressed, anxiety-free mom, enjoying this period where, and something for Joe with this last baby is like the floor time thing that we teach is so simple, but like something that dads can jump right on doing. Like, either you can start on the chest with the mom, but you can move to the floor every time the baby's happy. And it's like something for the dad to do with the baby, and knowing, man, it's like no different than taking him to football practice. Like I'm setting my baby's brain up to fly, and then they're not going to be the tearful 8-year-old who's driving me nuts. It's just this impactful time period that most people are like, what the heck do I do with this squirming, crying thing in my life that has changed everything? And obviously with number 4, you're going to you're well equipped. You're well equipped into handling all of that together. But it will be fascinating seeing these last 2 babies, or more if y'all have any, the difference, and you get to watch how it all plays out.
So fun.
Yeah. I love that. I love the work you guys are doing, and everyone needs to go give you a follow. Thank you guys so much for being on the show today.
Well, we have enjoyed this so much. Thank you.
Bye.
And just like that, Jenny and Carrie have left the chat. Holy smokes. I think all I've learned in this is that, one, I'm a bit of a baby and you're fussy, I think is what we heard.
What?
I don't know.
How is that what you got out of it?
Well, she said something along the lines of, how you were, managed, and maybe you're a little more on the fussy side. And I was like, I'm writing that down. So I did.
You know what? I don't think she used the term fussy. I think what she said was I was a sensitive sleeper. And I'm going to say, 1, maybe that's because I'm 8 months pregnant, or 2, I grew up in a household where my father wasn't there in the evening times a lot. And so I always feel like I slept with one ear open because it was just me and my mom in the house. And because he was a pilot, because he was working, like he worked, like he'd be gone for trips and then he'd be home. So it wasn't like he had a 9 to 5. And so I don't know, I was thinking about that in the episode. Like, I wonder if that impacts how I sleep today. And while I have so much sleep anxiety about like, can I hear what's going on? I don't know. Anyways, tangent. Love this conversation. Like I said, I've been following On Track Baby for at least 4 years now. I found them right around the time I had Ray. And so I actually, before I even had her. So as you can hear, I've actually implemented a lot of their learnings. And wow, I just think it's so powerful to hear that if you do have a kid who's going through some of this like maturity lag, I'll call it, you can make up for that with movement. And of course, food, nutrition, filling in their other biological needs is important as well. But it's just something I haven't heard as much talked about. And I just feel like Carrie and Jenny did a really good job laying that out. So I love that.
I dig it. Yeah, I was a big fan. I feel like I learned a lot too. So
I feel ready to go for this baby.
Let's go. Yeah,
I'm like so excited.
I'm ready for you to not be pregnant, and I'm ready for us to have this baby.
Yeah.
And for you not to be woken up by my breathing.
Oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. Okay, so tell me something about Hazelmeyer goods that you're excited for maybe coming up this holiday season.
We have some cool sales happening. I don't think I'm allowed to share them yet.
I wouldn't share what's in them, but
I'm excited about them.
They're curated sets because a lot of our products work well with the other products that we sell, obviously, because like you need a dish brush for your dish, but I'm excited about that too.
It's going to be so cool. And we have a few products, I believe, that are in the pipeline. Not exactly sure when exactly those are going to come, but we have those happening as well. I am still just hyped about some of the things that we're continuing to use. Like, I feel like we stumbled into lard dish soap. I didn't realize how amazing it was going to be. And it is. You see what I'm saying? It's almost like my excitement is growing still for it.
Yeah.
I was just doing dishes today before I came down here.
Praise.
I know. And oh my gosh, I love the degreaser so much. I love it. The charcoal soap that we have.
It smells really nice.
And it's so good. It just does such a good job. I love it being in the ramekin. Got to figure out, I think, next thing on our agenda, some sort of holding dish for the lard soap.
Yeah, for our traditional
I would like
lard
that.
soap.
I would like that. I feel like it would be a very convenient thing. Of course, I love the coffee. I was drinking it during this episode.
Decaf today. Love
Decaf
it.
today. Big fan of that. And I've always enjoyed the Honduras and the decaf. Those are kind of like my two initial go-tos. But then when I'm feeling spicy, I like to slip in an Ethiopia. That's kind of my go-to.
That's our lightest roast currently available, correct? Yeah. Love that. Yeah, Hazelmeyer Goods, we're excited for the holiday season as usual, but a lot of these things are just household things that, like, man, get yourself squared away in your kitchen. It'll change your life. I have been using our raw milk and tallow soap bar. And if I use anything on the baby at all, that's what it will be, because
it's just so soft.
It's so soft. It's literally made with raw milk, tallow from pasture raised cows. Like, it's the cleanest soap you'll find. It doesn't have a scent to it. It's not scented. And that with a little sea sponge.
So good.
Oh my gosh, your baby will be bathing in luxury. So I'm excited for that.
ShopTheH.com, where you can find all these things. Definitely go check that out. We have a subscription situation going on there as well. So if you want to get any of these products on a subscription, you can do that. And I know a lot of people have been getting their tallow creams on subscription.
Have they? I've seen a lot of soaps. I've seen a lot of people, because you think about it, you want your dish soap to arrive and you don't want to go without. And if you have been in the solid dish soap game and then you ran out of soap and had to go to the store and get liquid and you're like, oh, I'm a peasant, you know?
The peasant.
I'm a peasant. No. Then get on the subscription for
You can all find, again, shoptheh.com, hazelmeyergoods.com, same place. Go check it out. Find yourself some good stuff. If you want to find out about the sales we have coming up there and the different sets that we've curated, get on our Instagram, find us there at Hazelmeyer Goods, and you can find our email list on our website. Get on that as well so that you can be the first to know, because a lot of these things will probably go pretty quickly. So I recommend it. Definitely recommend getting on those
outlets.
Thank you. I was going to say like channels.
No.
Does that work?
I don't know.
Anyhow, if you'd like to hear more from Carrie and Jenny, go follow them on Instagram. They're awesome. Holy smokes. Could definitely hang out with them.
Yeah, I love them.
If you want to hear more from us, we're on Instagram as well. I'm at Joey Hazelmeyer. Elizabeth is at Liz Hazelmeyer, and at Homegrown_education. We also have curriculum to get you, your kids, people around you in the real food game to learn more about real food, how to nourish yourself, nourish your kids. That's at Homegrown homegrowneducation.org. We've got meal plans to help you not understand, but like build out a menu for the whole week, 6-week meal plan, grocery lists, recipes. It's called What's for Dinner. There's a pain point there that we've addressed. Nobody likes it when their spouse comes home and says, "What's for dinner?" So here we are. We also have a Substack where we create additional content for you around things like parenting, real food, pop culture.
Our last one, we did a full 45-minute Substack only podcast on how to raise a crunchy teenager. And it wasn't like how to instill your values on your teenager. It was like, no, this is the fruit we're seeing in our teenage daughter and some of the cool ways that, because of the habits and conversations we've been having since the time she was 8, now she is living this very intentional life. And so much of the teenage conversation is so negative these days, especially with daughters.
Oh yeah.
We wanted to bust through some of that and be like, no, our teenager's pretty freaking rad. Yes, there's everyone has their own struggles. We're not saying she's perfect or we're perfect parents, but I mean, it was a whole 45-minute chat that you'll never hear unless you're in that Substack community. So hop on there, and you can always claim your free week trial and get access to all of our posts for 7 days. So.
Go check that out. Substack.com. Find homegrown_education. Until next time, friends, that's a wrap.